Every day and every month that goes by, it seems like the world gets crazier, and one crazy thing that's happening right now is in the car market. Cars, used and new, are getting much more expensive, and there seems to be no end in sight. So why is this happening? What does it mean? How long is it going to last? One of you asked this question, and I was so happy that people are actually watching these videos that I was like, I'm responding to this one. So thank you for your question. I'll do my best to answer it, but there are other factors that we might not know about which have led to higher car prices, but these are the three main ones. My name is Christopher Claflin. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm the founder of CompleteWebLaunch.com, and I've always just been interested in businesses and startups and making money in unconventional ways and having a great time doing it. So for more content like that, hit the subscribe button, like this video, and let's talk about why car prices, used, new, even salvaged, are so insane right now. See, 2 years ago, I purchased this really awesome Corvette. And I remember when I bought it, the sales floor manager was trying to offer me a bunch of extra add-ons to protect your investment. And I was like, listen, I'm not dumb. This car is impractical. I know it's not an investment. I know I'm gonna lose money the minute that I drive it off the lot. I'm buying it for me and my enjoyment, and that's okay. Had you told me back then that it actually would have appreciated, I would have called you nuts. But here we are, and that car has increased in value by like almost 35%, which is absolutely crazy. But my Corvette hasn't appreciated nearly as much as some really unassuming vehicles out there. And the reason all this is happening is because of three primary drivers that have mostly been driven or triggered by the pandemic. The first major issue comes down to computer chip shortages. The auto market is still experiencing the effects of COVID-19, and that shut down and disrupted a lot of supply chains across the world. And one of those supply chains consists of computer chips. And every single vehicle manufacturer on the planet, every make and model, doesn't matter what brand, uses onboard computers, and those computers need chips. And there's a huge shortage of those chips right now. And no chips or fewer chips means no or fewer vehicles rolling off the lot. Fewer vehicles means constrained supply. And if you remember from Economics 101 in high school, a reduced supply means increased demand, and that means higher prices. So it's not even that these manufacturers cannot make the cars fast enough. It's the fact that they've got these cars sitting, they're ready, they have plenty. They just don't have the chips that they need in order for them to be fully functional. And they can't sell them without these computer chips, because without the computer chips, everything from the key fob unlocking your car to traction control, your lights, tire pressure, all of it, it won't work. So that's reason number one. Reason number two, and this is the scariest one to me, is inflation. The Federal Reserve, which is the central bank of the United States, has been steadily printing money since the financial crisis of 2008. They've been printing that money to use the money to purchase bonds and mortgage-backed securities, to artificially lower interest rates, to theoretically make it easier for everyday people to be able to afford to buy a home at a lower interest rate, to help prop up the housing market and support the economy. This is kind of another topic. I've made a couple videos that I'll link here in the description if you want to check that out further, but all of this money printing over time leads to the value of the money in circulation being less valuable. Again, Economics 101, more dollars chasing a fixed number of goods or a shrinking number of goods means that each one of those dollars isn't going to go as far in terms of its purchasing power. But things got way worse post-pandemic because the US government put together the COVID relief bill and started printing and spending money at a rate we maybe have never seen before. In fact, over the last 2 years, 80% of all dollars in existence have been printed in the last 2 years. That's a massive increase in the money supply, which means there's a lot more cash in the system chasing a fixed or shrinking number of goods. And so the value of each dollar just isn't going to go as far. The value of the dollar is declining faster recently than it has in the last decade or two. We've got some serious inflation problems, and it's worked its way into an already tight auto market. And reason number three that cars are getting so expensive comes down to how dealers and sellers have responded to inflation and the new car shortage. You see, as auto manufacturers have released fewer cars off their lot to deliver to dealers, dealers have seen this and they've started raising their prices because they just don't have as much inventory. Now, the auto manufacturers have noticed that the dealers have risen their prices and consumers have accepted it, whether it's because they just don't care that things are more expensive or they have no choice. So now there's kind of this pricing arms race between the manufacturers and the dealers. Manufacturers have slowly and quietly started to raise their prices, and dealers have been charging whatever they can for the inventory that they have. In some cases, dealers are marking cars up 50%, 100% over MSRP. And even though manufacturers aren't necessarily condoning this, they're not going after dealers for doing it either. They're kind of quietly letting it happen. So now as a consumer, you're going to purchase a car where both the dealer and the manufacturer have been piling margin on top of their base price. And they're sort of just trying to figure out how much more they can charge before people capitulate and say, no, I'm not buying anymore. And so far, that hasn't happened yet. So for the near term, we could very easily see a continued increase in the price of new and used cars. And what's been really interesting to observe is what's happened to the used car market for cars that are 2020 or later. The recently released Ford Bronco, these have been selling used for well into the six figures. Some used Ford Raptors now cost more than a used McLaren supercar did 3 to 5 years ago. And 2020 Corvettes, which were initially released with an MSRP sticker price of $60,000, are now selling for almost as much as a base level Lamborghini. This is crazy. Most Americans have never seen anything like this before. And unfortunately, we may just be at the beginning of this, because the higher prices in the auto market don't boil down to just one factor. The primary one that people cite most often is the shortage in computer chips, but inflation is a very real issue across the economy right now as well. So when it comes to post-COVID economics, the auto market has been one of the hardest hit when it comes to how much consumers have to pay to get their hands on goods and services. But when it comes to the computer chip supply shortage, it doesn't look like we're going to get anywhere anytime soon. Now, when it comes to inflation, the story might be a little bit different, because recently the Fed announced that going into 2022, they're going to let interest rates rise, which might work out. But when you consider how much money has been printed over the last decade and a half, especially the fact that almost 80% of dollars in circulation were printed in the last 22 months, it might be too little too late for the Fed to start raising interest rates. But that remains to be seen. And if the Fed can successfully increase rates and reduce the money supply and circulation, then we might be able to see some relief on that side. But there's a big debate on whether or not that's going to work and whether or not the Federal Reserve is actually in control of the inflation situation. But regardless of what happens with computer chips and inflation, at the end of the day, it kind of boils down to what consumers end up doing. Because as long as consumers continue to tolerate increasing prices, manufacturers and dealers will continue to push the envelope until they find the limit at which most people will no longer purchase a vehicle from them. Which is really unfortunate, because all of these outside factors have kind of given the green light for dealers and manufacturers to start testing the limits of what people are willing to pay for used and new cars. Which means even if inflation comes under control and the computer chips flood back into the market, we might not ever see prices as low as we did 5 years ago or 10 years ago, because dealerships and manufacturers now know that you and I are willing to pay more. So whether you're in the market for a used or new vehicle, for now, it looks like high prices are here to stay. So if you need to purchase a vehicle, waiting 6 months or a year may or may not mean that you find a vehicle at a lower price. So if you're in the market looking for a new vehicle, tell me what your strategy is. At what point do you say, okay, prices are not coming down, I'm just going to purchase one right now? Or are you one of those people that's just going to lock tight and not purchase anything until prices come down, even though you might be waiting for years? I'm curious what your thoughts are. Anyway, thanks so much for tuning in. My name is Christopher Claflin. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.